All right. Well, let's see if we can find some opportunities in your pro picks. Pro Picks is brought to you by ATB Financial. With over $100 billion in assets, ATB Financial is powering possibilities for more than 843,000 financial services clients. ATB Cormark Capital Markets is a leading North American investment firm providing holistic corporate and capital markets advice and full-service financial solutions. Visit atb.com/inthemoney for more information. Okay, your pro pick's not surprising because you're a healthcare guy. You brought us all healthcare names in different segments of the healthcare market. So let's start with Boston Scientific, MedTech.
Yep. So MedTech has been a little challenged lately as we've seen a rotation sort of back into the biotherapeutic space. MedTech was kind of the only game in town for a while within healthcare because it was sort of immunized from the policy stuff. And so we've owned Boston for a long time. We've owned it since we started at BMO. Like we bought it basically day one. So we've done well with it. We've traded in and out of it a little bit. We have added back to it. It's our single biggest active weight in most of the portfolios because it has pulled back. So it got up to about 106, 108, and then it pulled down back to just sub 90. And that was on a couple of things. Part was the rotation out of MedTech, but part was also that they did this acquisition of Penumbra, which is another MedTech company, a high growth MedTech company. And people were very concerned when they did that deal that they did it because their base business was slowing. And, that is often why companies do deals. That's not what the company says why they did that deal, but it's not why they would say it. So we'll see when they report in the next little while. But ultimately, it's trading at a valuation that we think is pretty attractive for a high growth med tech company. So the story on Boston for the last few years has been their device for atrial fibrillation. So atrial fibrillation. How nerdy do you want me to go science wise?
My parents we have cardiac.
Oh, all my uncles have atrial fibrillation. So this is coming for me someday when I'm trying to avoid hitting the mic. So you have 4 chambers in your heart. The top 2 are the atria, the bottom 2 are the ventricles. So the atria pump blood to the ventricles pump blood to the rest of the body. Fibrillation is when it stops beating rhythmically. It essentially quivers. If that happens in your ventricles, you got about a minute until you're dead. And so you have to that's when you get the big paddles in there. Yeah. The atria doesn't kill you. It just isn't good for you. And you can use leads to put it back into it, but ultimately it'll fall back into atrial fibrillation. And it's not good because if the heart's not pumping continuously, the blood sort of pools down and then it has a tendency to clot. And if it clots, you can have a stroke. So ideally what you want to do is put somebody back into normal heart rhythm and keep them there, and then they don't have to do that. Because the treatment is you have to be on oral anticoagulants, so something like an Eliquis, so that you don't get that risk of, but then you have bleeding risk, so people don't want that. So what often happens in the cause of atrial fibrillation is there's just a locus of cells, so a little group of cells that has lost their ability to keep time, essentially. And the analogy I always use is like a synchronized swimming team. So if they've got 8 people and one person loses the ability to keep time, then they'll mess everybody else up. And so what you really want to do is fire the person who doesn't have time. So to fire that group of cells, you actually have to kill them. And so the way that you can treat this in a more permanent way is you take those cells and you kill them and then you put them back heart rhythm, and then they no longer mess up the rest of the heart. So there's 2 ways that you used to be able to do that, or you can still do it, but it was either you burn them, so it cauterize it essentially, or you freeze those cells to death. But it actually does a fair bit of damage to the surrounding heart tissue. So cardiologists didn't really want to do it. So Boston came up with something called pulse field ablation, which is a lower energy way of killing those cells without damaging the heart tissue. And so then they got a massive amount of adoption from cardiologists because it's a much safer way to do this. And so our view on that was it was going to be, call it a $3 to $5 billion opportunity on a $12 billion top line. And that's largely what has played out. There are other parts to the Boston Scientific story that are important now. So that pulse field ablation, that atrial fibrillation ablation technique is still there. It's still growing very nicely. There is some competition coming, and that's the other concern that people had around Boston. But there's something else called Watchman. And so Watchman is also for atrial fibrillation. So about 90% of clots that happen and strokes that happen because of atrial fibrillation, because basically blood pools in this thing called your left atrial appendage. It's just this little finger-shaped thing where the blood pools and if it's not flowing smoothly. So Boston has something called Watchman, where they basically stick a device in there to block that. And so the blood doesn't go in there and it doesn't pool. So that has data coming out in the next little while, which we think will be positive. It's against oral anticoagulants. So if it's better than oral anticoagulants, I think we're going to see big adoption. So Watchman is sort of the next leg of growth for the base Boston Scientific business.
If the stock picking doesn't work out, you could be on Dr. Oz.
I know. I love talking about healthcare stuff.
I can tell the passion is coming out. Okay, so a few questions on that. What causes atrial fibrillation? Is it genetic or is it lifestyle?
Both.
And so now that we're all going to be super thin and on Ozempic,
Sure.
is that the catalyst for slower growth?
Let's say Mounjaro, because we own Lilly, not.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
I think ultimately it's not going to. There are lots of people who get atrial fibrillation, and that was the big fear in med tech stocks when it was really Novo's data that came out a couple of years ago, and all the med tech stocks plummeted because like nobody's going to be fat anymore. We're never going to have cardiovascular disease. That's probably not true. And we actually had some great opportunities to buy stocks at a discount on that. Because my favorite thing was when a sell side analyst came out and said, airlines will be more profitable because people will lose weight and it will cost less fuel. Now, one thing I know is airlines are never more profitable. They will always find a way to lose money. But that is sort of when you get to the silly season of a stock, and then you knew that it was sort of peak. So I think there will be advantages to this. We're obviously bullish on the GLP-1 class, but there's a lot of people who are going to need this for the next 20 years. You can't really reverse some of the damage that you do to your heart. And some of it happens anyway. It's not entirely being overweight or being high blood pressure. There is a genetic component to it.
Is the stock expensive? Is it too expensive for growth that's slowing?
We don't really think growth is slowing. And that's sort of the key thing. If you believe that, I think, and especially Penumbra actually, we think was a pretty good deal because it was one of the few assets that is in their core space that is actually growing faster. So it should be accretive to bottom line. So if you think about where Boston's trading, it's trading at, call it 25, 26 times next year's earnings, but it's still growing very strongly in sort of the teens, and so the PEG basis it's fine. So we actually think that it's going to grow well still. And if we're wrong, then it'll be a problem. But that's our view on the opportunity for both Watchman and Penumbra, and still with the pulse field ablation with Farapulse.
I got one pullback right in my portfolio in healthcare, and it was Eli Lilly.
Okay,
which is one of your top ideas. I should have started with that. Which is one of your top ideas. Explain to me why Lilly from here and why Lilly has done better than Novo Nordisk, even though Ozempic is like the Kleenex.
It is.
GLP-1s.
Well, part of the reason why Ozempic is advertising as much in Canada as it is because they lose patent protection at the end of the year because a lawyer apparently forgot to file to get them a patent extension. So I assume that person is very fired. So that's part of the reason why you can't turn on a TV in Canada without seeing an Ozempic ad or a Wegovy ad, because they are trying to get as many people on brand before that changes.
Patent expires.
So, look, Lilly was easy money for a while. And like NVIDIA, these are the sort of like overnight successes that actually take 20 years. The first company I ever wrote up when I was on the sell side was a company called Conjichem out of Montreal, which did GLP-1 attached to serum albumin. It did not work because everyone threw up, but we've known the potential.
I bet they lost weight.
They sure did. Yeah, you can lose weight. Oh, it did tend to come back on though once they stopped throwing up. And so GLP-1 molecule has been around for a long time and the potential's been there. It was only in sort of 2019, 2020 where we really saw the weight loss potential. And that was with semaglutide, which is the active molecule in Wegovy and Ozempic. So that's great. And Lilly had one that was very similar, right? Those are the two competing drugs. So why did they split and why do we still like Lilly? And the reason we like Lilly before they started to split, we've owned them both over time, is Lilly has a better pipeline than Novo does. So if you look at the next generation, so if you look at orforglipron, which is their oral drug, versus oral Wegovy, orforglipron we think will be better, plus they can make more of it. Wegovy got to market, the oral Wegovy got to market before. CagriSema, which was supposed to be Novo's next generation to compete with tirzepatide, which is the active ingredient in Mounjaro and Zepbound, it just didn't work very well. And the data was disappointing, and that was data last year. And so Novo got as high as 1,000 and got, at the time of the CagriSema data, went down 15% from about 600, I think. And we had owned a little bit still in the healthcare fund, and we sold it at that point. And Lilly also pulled back after that too, which we can talk about. So really, it's just that we think Lilly has a better pipeline in terms of what's next. So they have orforglipron, which we think will be better than oral Wegovy. They have the triple G, which is retatrutide, which had very strong data, almost 30% weight loss in a trial that came out right before Christmas. And we'll see more data from that. I mean, there's a point where you can't lose more weight, right? Like you don't want 100% weight loss. That's not good.
Yes.
But for patients with the BMI of like 40, this is meaningful weight loss. And so we just like that pipeline. And Novo's just a little bit in trouble because their pipeline isn't as good. And Metsera, if it works, Roche, if it works, starts competing. So you have to keep advancing. So Lilly, I think, I know you asked the question, and I talk a long time sometimes.
No, keep going.
Lilly has better growth going forward than Novo does because of, I think, a better position in the oral market. I think better with the injectables as well. The market expansion that came with that deal that we talked about with Trump is going to be very meaningful for driving growth, even if prices come down. So there's just a better growth path for Lilly.
And when you talk about their pipeline, are you talking about their pipeline within diabetes and weight loss, or is it also the fact that they've got Alzheimer's? And
I don't put a lot of stock on the Alzheimer's. I hope it works. I hope for patients it works. Yeah. Alzheimer's has been a very tough space, and even the drugs that have worked, like Leqembi from Biogen, haven't sold. And it's just it hasn't sold for a couple of reasons. It's hard to get infusion centers. You need imaging before you do it. It doesn't actually make you better. It just makes you get worse slower, and that's tough to do. And it's very restrictive in how you do it. So it worked. It just didn't work well enough. And a big problem with Alzheimer's, and this is the big challenge in the field, is by the time you know you have it, it's too late a lot of the time. So you have to keep going earlier and earlier. So the Lilly trial is in very early Alzheimer's, basically trying to stop it from happening. That's a tough thing to do. It's easier to cure something than it is prove that it didn't happen. So all those things are sort of upside, but I'm not too worried about it for Lilly.
Again, I go to valuation 40 times, more than 40 times. Yep. Is that expensive?
40 times this year. 29 times next year. For the growth that they have, no. Because if you look, by 2030, the top line should double, right? And you can pay a premium. Video will show you that. You can pay a high multiple for things that are growing very well. If anything threatens that growth, or we see really good competitive data from somebody else, then that's something you have to question. But right now, there's a pretty clean path for very strong earnings growth at Lilly. And so it's not our number one holding, and we have trimmed it over time, and we've traded it pretty actively. We sold it down after the Novo data because we knew there was going to be sort of a competitive reaction from Novo. And in an oligopoly, the last thing you want to do is get in a price war. Yeah. And Novo started to do that a little bit. And then that was the sort of hims and hers deal. And they've pulled back from that a lot because I think they realized that nobody wins in a price war.
Like a marketing platform that didn't go well.
It did not go well. And I think it got the CEO fired, frankly.
That's right,
So I think they are going to be a little bit more rational.
Your third pick, and I like this because it comes out of, it's not a household name.
No.
It's Belgian biotech.
Yep.
UCB.
Yep.
Looks like has pills for like Crohn's disease, Parkinson's, in that neighborhood.
The Parkinson's stuff, sort of the legacy. The big growth driver for UCB is a drug called Bimzelx, and so I
love these names, by the way.
Me too. But nobody likes these things. Like science guys, they love the jargon, right? Like I love
what I do, just as like a little hack, as somebody who doesn't have a PhD, I take all those analyst notes now and I dump it in ChatGPT and I say, write this in English. And I'm like,
I know, I don't like that because part of the rarity that we had is we could use all this jargon that no one could understand. So we became very important with ourselves. I remember looking up one time because one of the side effects of a drug was urticaria. I'm like, what is urticaria? I'm like, hives. It's a pretty fancy name for hives, right? But you don't say hives.
You get kind of itchy.
Yeah. So you say urticaria and then people are like, oh, he knows stuff.
Okay. You can use all the big words and then everybody just.
I will. I'm not as smart as people think I am. So I tend to use the simpler words, but so it's a drug for autoimmune diseases, right? And so it is essentially things for, like, I won't give you the really crazy one because I'll probably mispronounce it as well. But it's things like psoriasis, right? That's the sort of original indication. So this is where your own immune system goes a little crazy and it starts attacking your cells and you want to just stop it. So the big drugs in these categories are things like Humira, which was the original one, or Skyrizi is a big one. If you ever watch US TV, you'll see an ad for Skyrizi. There's no question because nobody advertises more than AbbVie. Cosentyx. And so this is sort of the next generation of that. So they block something called interleukins, which are just inflammatory proteins. This just does a better job of that. And the reason why it's an interesting stock is a drug like a drug like Skyrizi is like a $6 billion a year drug in psoriasis. Cosentyx is a $4 billion a year. We think this will be $4 to $5 billion. So not necessarily bigger. It is, I think, better and it's taking share. But UCB is a much smaller company. So, a $6 billion drug for AbbVie just fills a patent hole that they had with Humira. Same with Cosentyx, right? Novartis. But this will actually double the size of UCB. So these are really exciting opportunities for us if we can find good science, a good molecule, particularly in a smaller company where it can really change the profile of that. So if you look at UCB, it trades actually not that different a multiple than Lilly, but the growth is fantastic and goes on for a long time. So the peg for something like UCB is 0.6, 0.7.
Price to earnings growth.
Yeah, you just don't see that very often, especially if there's not a real risk around the patents. There's not a real competitive risk. The biggest risk that they had was a company called Moonlake, which failed in their trial essentially last year, and that was a big gap up. And so UCB is just a very clean, very good story, very well run. I've seen them in Brussels a few times. The CFO is fantastic. She's really knowledgeable about her business. Like I walked away from that meeting going like, oh, she knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
So it is just a unique story. It's just, as you said, most people haven't heard of it.
Well, because why are we going to Belgium?
Yeah.
And
the fries mostly, but
the waffles.
Yeah.
Do you think that these kind of international stories, smaller stories, also benefit from like the fact that we're now hunting for them? We're looking for these opportunities.
For sure. And I mean, it's always interesting because, for a stock to really, and this goes back to we just have to sell it to somebody for more, there's a limit to the liquidity of some of these stocks. So there's a natural cap because you just can't, it's a family, they've got a dual share. Like it's one of those ones where you can't get the liquidity. They don't have an ADR, so you have to trade it on them. So not everybody can do it. But yeah, when you look for these durable growth stories, there just aren't that many, and people are willing to go outside. So there's another one called Organics, which we like, which is actually another Belgian one. I don't know what the deal is with all our Belgian stories, but these are just high growth, high quality companies that people do tend to look at as the next level down. And it takes a lot. I do some of this. Carmen Tang on my team does some of this as well. Like you need the science background to really dig into these things to get confidence around them. And so people tend to wait until it's obvious to get into them. And therein lies the opportunity for people with sector specialist
PhDs. You hear that, kids? Get off TikTok.
Yeah.
Get to school.
You don't have to do a PhD though. That's sometimes maybe it's too much, but it is a really interesting thing to sort of be able to go. And again, not to toot our own horn a little bit, but that's why we have the sector specialist model, right? It's something, if you're a generalist, you're never going to look at UCB. You need to have the time and the ability to go look for that, to find those opportunities that aren't that sort of standard story. And that's why the team is built the way it is. I think that's why we've had successes, because we have, you've talked to Malcolm, if you talk to John, like really deep expertise to go find these hidden gems a little bit sometimes.
Well, I've learned a lot. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.